Ethan first saw the girl in white 1 week after he took a job as the night clerk at the Maison Vauclair Hotel. It happened shortly before midnight. The guests had gone to their rooms, leaving Ethan alone behind the front desk. An antique clock ticked in the lobby. Cicadas chirped beyond the windows, and frogs called in the distance from the swamps. Ethan was checking the guest register when he heard footsteps on the main staircase. First, a white hem appeared around the turn. Then a young black girl in a long, old-fashioned dress came into view. She held the railing and slowly descended the stairs. Ethan did not remember seeing her among the guests. She was very young and strikingly beautiful. The white fabric moved softly with every step, and the chandelier light gleamed in her dark hair. As she drew closer, Ethan noticed the faint scent of magnolias. He assumed she had come for a wedding or a photo shoot. The hotel often hosted small receptions, so her unusual dress did not surprise him. She stopped in front of the desk. "Good evening," Ethan said. The girl studied his face, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. "Have the soldiers arrived yet?" Ethan thought he had misheard her and asked which soldiers she meant. The girl turned toward the locked front doors. Hope appeared on her face, then almost immediately gave way to fear. Ethan did not know what to say. Perhaps she had been drinking or had taken some kind of medication. The best thing to do was calmly ask for her room number and escort her upstairs. "Tell me your room number." She did not answer. She kept staring at the doors, as if someone she had been waiting for a very long time was standing on the other side. At that moment, the telephone rang. Ethan picked it up. A guest asked him to bring some water to her room. The call lasted only a few seconds, but when Ethan looked back into the lobby, the girl was gone. He stepped out from behind the desk. The hallways and staircase were empty. Ethan decided she must have quickly returned to her room. He did not check the security cameras. Nothing serious had happened. Even so, when he returned to the desk, he continued staring at the front doors for a while. The lobby still smelled of magnolias. 1 week earlier, Ethan had not even known Maison Vauclair existed. At 30, he still had not managed to build a stable life. Ethan was not afraid of hard work. He had unloaded trucks, repaired boat motors, worked as a courier, and helped on construction sites. But he never stayed at one job for long. His latest job fell through at the worst possible time. Rent was due in a few days, and he barely had enough money for groceries. Ethan was reading job listings when his old high school friend Daniel Reed called him. Daniel had recently become the manager of a small luxury hotel. He urgently needed a night clerk. The previous employee had quit without warning. No experience was required. At night, Ethan would answer calls, greet late arrivals, and watch the front desk. The pay was good, and meals were provided for the staff. "It's a quiet job," Daniel said. "I'll show you everything." Ethan looked at his unpaid bills. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning." Ethan accepted. At that moment, all he cared about was steady work. He did not even ask why the previous night clerk had suddenly quit. The next morning, Ethan drove to Maison Vauclair. The road gradually narrowed until it became a single strip of pavement running between enormous live oaks. Spanish moss hung from the branches. Dark water lay beyond the trees, almost completely hidden by tall grass and dense vegetation. At the end of a long driveway stood a large, carefully restored mansion. Tall windows reflected the morning sun, and a wide veranda with white columns stretched across the pale facade. It seemed as if time had turned backward and restored the plantation to its former appearance. The property had once been a sugar plantation owned by the French Vauclair family. After the Civil War, the plantation fell into decline. The mansion changed hands several times, then stood abandoned for more than a century. A few years earlier, wealthy investors had purchased the house, installed electricity, replaced part of the structure, and opened an exclusive boutique hotel. Daniel met Ethan in the lobby. He wore a dark suit, a white shirt, and a tie. Standing beside him in jeans and an old jacket, Ethan immediately felt out of place. "You'll get used to it," Daniel said, noticing his expression. "In a week, you'll walk around here like you own the place." He showed Ethan through the hotel. There were only a few guest rooms. The owners had preserved everything that survived from the old house: wood paneling, marble fireplaces, darkened mirrors, and a wide staircase with carved railings. Some of the furniture had also belonged to the Vauclair family. Ethan liked the mansion, but he had trouble picturing himself among wealthy guests. There seemed to be a rule for every situation. He had to greet visitors properly, answer calls, take requests, and remain calm even when the person at the desk behaved badly. Daniel promised to help him adjust. At the end of the tour, they climbed to the top floor. It was noticeably quieter there. The hallway ended at a small landing and a locked door with a dark metal plate marked 30. Daniel warned him that room 30 was not rented to guests. It had once been a private bedroom. During the restoration, the owners had decided to leave it untouched. Parts of the floor were rotten, and repairing the supporting structure would cost a great deal of money. Do not go inside unless you have to. The key was kept at the front desk with the other service keys. It was there in case of a fire, a leak, or some other emergency. Ethan looked at the old door and asked why the owners had not completed the repairs from the beginning. Daniel explained that they had calculated the cost and decided they could sacrifice one closed room. He was about to head downstairs when he stopped. The locals say a mysterious lady of the house used to live in there. He said it with a smile, like a harmless joke for the new employee. Ethan asked what had happened to her. Daniel said no one knew. It was only an old legend. Daniel walked toward the stairs. Ethan looked once more at room 30, then followed him. At the time, the locked room seemed like an ordinary part of an old house. His first night shifts were quiet. Ethan greeted late arrivals, answered calls, brought water to rooms, and called taxis. Once, he had to escort a drunk guest upstairs because the man could not find the right door. Gradually, Ethan settled in and stopped feeling like an outsider. The hotel grew still at night, but the old house was never completely silent. Water moved through the pipes, wooden floors creaked, the branches of nearby oaks brushed against the walls. After meeting the girl in white, Ethan thought several times about her strange question. Had the soldiers arrived yet? The next day, he checked the guest list. There was no young black girl registered at the hotel. Ethan decided she might have been visiting one of the guests or attending a private event. He did not see her again, and soon almost stopped thinking about the encounter. Work continued as usual, and the question about the soldiers became one of the many odd things a night clerk occasionally heard. A few nights later, the front desk telephone rang at about 2 a.m. The caller was a man in room 20. From his irritated voice, Ethan could tell that the noise had kept him awake for some time. "Someone has been crying above me for almost an hour. First she was pacing back and forth. Now she started knocking too. Do something about it." Ethan immediately remembered the layout. The locked room 30 was directly above room 20. He promised to investigate and went upstairs. At first, Ethan heard only the familiar creak of the floorboards. Near the final flight of stairs, another sound emerged. Someone behind the door was crying softly, trying to suppress her sobs. Ethan stopped. The crying came from room 30. He moved slowly down the hall. The sobs became clearer with every step. Between them came a quiet knock, as if someone occasionally touched the wall with an open hand. Near the door, Ethan noticed the strong scent of magnolias. The crying sounded very close now. Someone was definitely on the other side of the thin wooden door. Ethan knocked. The room went silent at once. He waited, then knocked again, and asked if everything was all right. No one answered. Ethan carefully pressed down on the handle. The door was locked. He could have gone downstairs for the key, but Daniel had warned him about the rotten floor and told him not to enter without a serious reason. Ethan stood by the door for several minutes and listened. No other sound came from inside. He returned to the guest and said he had checked the top floor. It was quiet now. The man muttered something about the strange hotel and closed his door. Ethan went back to the lobby, but he did not sit behind the desk. If someone had truly been inside room 30, that person had to have crossed the upper hallway. He asked the security guard on duty to show him the camera footage. They rewound the recording to the time of the call from room 20. The top floor remained empty. No one approached the locked room or came out of it. Then Ethan appeared on the screen. The recording showed him walking down the hall, stopping at the door, listening, knocking, and asking a question. "See?" the guard said. "No one was there except you." Ethan was about to agree when he noticed movement. A blurred white shape slowly formed behind him. It stretched upward, briefly taking on the outline of a human figure. Ethan asked the guard to freeze the image. On the screen, he stood facing the door. The white figure was only a few steps behind him. 1 second later, static covered the picture. When the recording returned, the hallway was empty again. The guard dismissed it as glare or a camera malfunction. Similar glitches had happened before in the old building. Ethan said nothing. He stared at the frozen frame and remembered the white dress, the question about the soldiers, and the scent of magnolias outside the locked door. The rest of the shift passed quietly, but Ethan did not return to the top floor. Near dawn, he handed the desk over to the next clerk and stepped outside to smoke through the service entrance. Night was fading. Gray light had begun to spread above the swamps, although the mansion's windows were still dark. Ethan leaned against the wall, lit a cigarette, and casually looked up. The girl was standing in the window of room 30. He could see her much more clearly now. She was the same young black girl in the white dress who had asked about the soldiers. She was not looking at Ethan. Her face was turned toward the road, as if she were still waiting for someone. Then she slowly raised one hand and pressed her palm against the glass. The cigarette fell from Ethan's fingers. He pulled open the service door and hurried upstairs. Nothing had changed on the top floor. The hallway was empty, and the door to room 30 was locked. Ethan pulled the handle several times, then returned to the front desk. The key was still in its place. That morning, he waited for Daniel and told him about the guest's complaint, the crying behind the locked door, and the white figure on the recording. He mentioned the girl in the window last. Daniel listened with a smile. He explained that night work could exhaust anyone, and that every sound in an old house could resemble footsteps or crying. Ethan began to lose patience. He reminded Daniel that the guest in room 20 had heard the noise too. Then he mentioned the scent of magnolias. Daniel's smile disappeared. After a long pause, he admitted that the previous night clerk had also heard a woman crying and footsteps on the top floor. Several times, the man thought someone was walking near room 30. Soon afterward, he quit and never returned to the hotel. Ethan asked why Daniel had not told him earlier. The manager said he had not wanted to frighten him with local stories. Old houses always attracted tales of ghosts, and most of those tales began with the staff. Daniel asked Ethan not to discuss the incidents with the guests. The hotel had opened only recently. If people began talking about crying, figures in the hall, and a girl in white, Maison Vauclair would quickly gain the wrong kind of reputation. The owners would blame the manager. Ethan agreed to keep quiet. But now he knew he was not the first person to hear crying outside room 30. During the following week, strange incidents began happening almost every night. Guests in different rooms complained about a woman crying. Slow footsteps sometimes sounded on the staircase, although the cameras showed an empty lobby. The scent of magnolias appeared more and more often on the top floor. One morning, a housekeeper found a fresh flower on the pillow in a clean, vacant room. No one had checked into it the previous day, and its door had remained locked all night. There were other reports of the girl in white. Guests saw her in hallways and near the stairs. Everyone assumed she was staying at the hotel, so no one reported the encounters immediately. One elderly man told Ethan that he had met her near the main entrance. She asked him for the date. When she heard his answer, she became frightened and hurried into a side hallway. The man tried to see if she was all right, but could not catch up with her. Ethan told Daniel about the conversation. Daniel asked him not to attach any importance to it. Even so, Ethan began watching the staircase and listening to every footstep. A few nights later, the girl appeared again. She stood near the main entrance, staring through the glass doors at the empty road. She wore the same white dress. Ethan immediately stepped out from behind the desk and asked her to stop. He asked who she was and whether she was staying at the hotel. She did not answer. Her gaze moved past Ethan toward the staircase. "Have the soldiers arrived yet?" she asked again. This time, Ethan did not ask which soldiers she meant. He calmly explained that the war had ended a very long time ago. The girl slowly shook her head, as if she could not believe him. "Then why won't he let me go?" she said quietly. A chill moved down Ethan's back. He asked who was keeping her in the hotel. A heavy footstep sounded from the top floor. Someone was slowly descending the staircase. The girl backed toward the doors, her face filled with such intense fear that Ethan looked upstairs. The staircase was empty. "He's coming," she whispered. The lights in the lobby went out. Ethan stood in complete darkness. He heard the brief rustle of the white dress and smelled the strong scent of magnolias. A few seconds later, the lights came back on. No one stood near the doors. A fresh magnolia blossom lay on the floor. That morning, Ethan went to Daniel and told him about the second encounter. He described how the girl had asked about the soldiers again, how the footsteps had frightened her, and how she had said someone would not let her leave. This time, Daniel did not laugh. He admitted that the hotel's owners had told him about a young black girl named Celeste Baptiste. More than a century and a half earlier, she had lived in the room beneath the roof. The elderly owner of the mansion, Auguste Vauclair, bought her expensive dresses, jewelry, and books. One morning, Celeste was found hanging from an oak branch in front of the house. She was wearing a white dress, and a long veil was tight around her neck. The investigation concluded that she had jumped from the window of room 30 and taken her own life. Daniel knew nothing else, but Ethan no longer believed it had been suicide. Celeste's questions sounded again in his memory. Why would he not let her go? Now those words meant something entirely different. Several quiet nights followed. Ethan began to hope the strange activity had ended. Then, at about 2 a.m, the telephone rang. The man in room 20 was calling again. This time, irritation had been replaced by fear. The guest said a violent struggle was taking place above him. Heavy blows shook the ceiling. A man was shouting at a girl, and she was crying and demanding that someone open the door. Ethan looked at the staircase. Only the locked room 30 stood above room 20. The guest said he would call the police. Ethan asked him to wait a few minutes and promised to investigate immediately. He took the service key and stepped out from behind the desk. Nothing unusual happened on the first flight of stairs, but the higher Ethan climbed, the weaker the electric lights became. The wall lamps faded, and an uneven glow like candlelight appeared in their place. Ethan stopped and looked back. The brightly lit lobby was still visible below. The top floor, however, looked different. The modern carpet was gone. Old wooden boards, darkened by age, lay beneath his feet. A girl screamed above him. Then a blow shook the railing. Ethan tightened his grip on the key and kept climbing. A low male voice sounded behind the girl's sobs. Ethan could not make out the words, but the man spoke loudly and angrily. Then Ethan finally understood the girl. She was demanding that someone open the door and let her out. The scent of magnolias filled the upper landing. The door to room 30 stood partly open. Only minutes earlier, Ethan had seen its key among the service keys. The door could not be opened without it. Now the key was in his hand, while a girl cried softly beyond the dark opening. Ethan pushed the door and went inside. Darkness met him. Light from the hallway reached only a short distance into the room. It revealed the shapes of an old bed, a wardrobe, and a large mirror. Dust covered the furniture. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and some of the floorboards had blackened and collapsed. The girl in white stood by the window. She was watching the road, just as she had during their first meeting. The long hem of her dress rested on the dusty floor, but the fabric remained perfectly clean. A white magnolia blossom rested in her dark hair. Ethan recognized her immediately. He remembered the white figure on the recording, the locked door, the girl at the window while the key remained at the front desk. Every explanation he had used to calm himself over the past several days had become meaningless. The figure before him was the ghost of Celeste Baptiste. Ethan stepped back toward the exit. The door slammed shut. The hallway light vanished, and the room fell into darkness. A faint glow appeared near the mirror. It resembled reflected candlelight, although no candles were burning. The girl slowly turned. The scent of magnolias spread through the room. It became so strong that it seemed as if dozens of trees had blossomed beyond the walls at once. Celeste moved toward Ethan. He stepped back. A rotten board cracked loudly beneath his foot. Ethan froze. The girl stopped in front of him. She extended one hand toward Ethan and pointed at the old mirror with the other. He looked into the darkened glass. The abandoned room appeared in the reflection. Ethan saw the bed, the closed window, and himself near the door. Celeste was not in the mirror. She stood directly in front of him, but the space between Ethan and the mirror was empty in the reflection. The faint glow inside the glass grew brighter. "I want you to see," the girl said softly. Ethan looked at her outstretched hand. He did not want to touch her, but he saw no other way out of the room. He slowly reached forward. His fingers touched cold skin. An icy wave passed through his body. Ethan tried to pull his hand away, but he could no longer move. The mirror's surface trembled, as if something had touched dark water. The dust vanished. The cracks slowly closed. One candle after another came to life deep inside the reflection. The abandoned room dissolved. In its place appeared the same bedroom as it had looked more than a century and a half earlier. Warm light filled the mirror. Room 30 looked completely different in the reflection. Heavy curtains covered the windows. An expensive bed with a tall headboard stood against the wall. Nearby were a writing desk and a dark wooden wardrobe. Candles burned in metal holders. Celeste stood near the window. She looked much younger than she had during her encounters with Ethan. She wore a plain dress, and her hair was pinned back. She could not have been more than 14. The door opened, and an elderly man with gray hair entered the room. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself like a man accustomed to controlling other people's lives. Ethan had never seen him before, but there could be no doubt. It was Auguste Vauclair. The mirror was showing the end of 1862. Auguste was already over 60. Among the enslaved people working in the mansion, he had noticed 14-year-old Celeste Baptiste. First, he moved her into the main house. Soon afterward, he made Celeste his mistress. She had no choice. Auguste placed her apart from everyone else, in the room beneath the roof. On his orders, an expensive bed, a writing desk, a large mirror, and a wardrobe were brought upstairs. Beautiful dresses, books, and jewelry gradually appeared in the room. From the outside, it might have looked like generosity, but the door was locked from the other side. Celeste could leave only with Auguste's permission. She was forbidden to go downstairs alone or speak to the servants. Food was carried upstairs and left outside her door. Auguste visited her regularly. He taught her to read and write, brought books, selected her dresses, and gave her jewelry. He liked to think of himself as generous and caring. To Celeste, the room remained a prison. She was Auguste's mistress only because she was enslaved and could not refuse him. She spent long hours at the window, watching the road. Sometimes she tried to speak to the servants who brought her food. They lowered their eyes and hurried away. Auguste had strictly forbidden them to answer her questions. The image in the mirror changed. Almost 2 years had passed. Celeste was older, but her life remained the same. The same room, the same locked door, the same footsteps on the stairs. It was now 1864. The mirror showed Auguste in the downstairs study. He sat at his desk, reading papers delivered from town. Excited voices sounded beyond the closed windows. News had reached this part of Louisiana that slavery had been abolished. Auguste sat motionless for a long time. Then he folded the papers, placed them in a desk drawer, and turned the key. He told Celeste nothing. After that day, her door opened even less often. Auguste forbade her to approach the window. The servants were warned again not to speak to her. Whenever Celeste asked what was happening outside the mansion, Auguste said the war was still going on. He told her soldiers controlled the roads and that it was dangerous to leave the house. In truth, Auguste feared that Celeste would learn she was free and leave at once. Another year passed. The image changed again. The mirror now showed the spring of 1865. Celeste was 16 years old. One morning, an elderly cook came upstairs with breakfast. As usual, she intended to leave the tray outside the door. Celeste heard her footsteps and asked whether the war had ended. The cook remained silent for a long time. Then she quietly admitted that slavery had been abolished a year earlier. Union soldiers had already appeared in the area, and formerly enslaved people were leaving neighboring plantations. At first, Celeste could not believe what she had heard. She had been a free person for about a year. Auguste knew the truth, yet had continued to keep her locked in the room. From that morning on, Celeste waited for the soldiers. She believed their arrival would force Auguste to open the door and let her leave the mansion. Ethan finally understood why her ghost kept asking the same question. Had the soldiers arrived yet? The vision continued. That evening, Auguste went upstairs, locked the door, and slipped the key into the pocket of his coat. Celeste was waiting by the window. Slavery was abolished a year ago. I am free. You hid the truth from me all this time. The old planter did not deny it. I hid it because I did not want to lose you. Celeste demanded that he open the door. She would no longer remain in the mansion. Then Auguste offered to make her his wife. He promised trips to New Orleans, balls, expensive clothes, and a place as the lady of the house. From then on, he claimed, she would live beside him as a free woman. He did not mention that the law would never allow him to fulfill those promises. All he wanted was Celeste's agreement to stay. I do not want your dresses, your jewelry, or this house. I do not want to be your wife. I want to leave and live my own life. She moved toward the door. Auguste blocked her path. He reminded her of the books, the gifts, and all the years of his so-called care. But Celeste had never asked to be imprisoned. All she wanted now was the key. Her refusal sent the old man into a rage. For the first time, he understood that he had lost his power over her. Neither wealth nor promises could make her stay. When Celeste tried to pass, Auguste grabbed her arm. She pulled free and reached for the pocket that held the key. They struggled. Auguste shoved her with all his strength. Celeste struck her head against the wall and fell to the floor. A bloodstain remained behind her. The planter slowly approached and bent over her motionless body. She was not breathing. Only then did he understand what he had done. For several minutes, Auguste stood over the body without moving. His shock gradually gave way to fear. Celeste had been free for about a year. If anyone discovered that he had kept her imprisoned and then killed her, none of his former rights as her owner would protect him. He had to make the death look like suicide. A white dress with a long veil lay on the bed. Auguste had bought it for the day when he intended to call Celeste his wife. He dressed her in white, wrapped the long veil around her neck, and opened the window. Below, a broad branch of an old live oak stretched close to the wall of the mansion. Auguste lifted the body and pushed it outside. The long veil caught on the branch. Celeste's body hung in front of the house. It now looked as though she had jumped from the window and the veil had caught, hanging her by the neck. The servants saw her the next morning. The local sheriff arrived with 2 deputies. August met them in the yard and calmly explained that the dead girl had been a young servant in his house. He claimed he did not know why she had decided to take her own life. No one wanted to investigate the death of a young black servant closely. The room upstairs was examined carelessly. The locked door, the blood on the wall, and the servants' accounts of Auguste's restrictions were left out of the report. Later, the planter met with the sheriff alone. Soon afterward, the case was closed. Celeste's death was officially ruled a suicide. Auguste Vauclair's lie became the only known story of her death. For more than a century and a half, no one knew what had truly happened in room 30. The vision ended. The warm candlelight vanished. Ethan once again stood in the dark, abandoned room. Celeste was beside the old mirror, watching him in silence. The blood stain slowly appeared on the wall. Ethan stepped back, but a rotten board broke beneath his foot. His leg dropped between the supports. He lost his balance, fell, and struck his head. The room disappeared into darkness. Ethan woke in a hospital. Daniel was sitting beside his bed. He explained that the man in room 20 had called the front desk again. The guest wanted to know whether the disturbance above his ceiling had been resolved. When the staff realized Ethan had not returned, they went upstairs. They found him unconscious inside room 30. Daniel did not understand why Ethan had entered or why the door had already been open. The room key had been with Ethan the entire time. Ethan explained that the door was already ajar when he reached it. Then he said, "I know what happened to Celeste." He briefly described the vision in the mirror, the argument, the blood on the wall, the body thrown from the window. Daniel listened in silence. The story of suicide, repeated for generations by the hotel's owners, no longer seemed true. Ethan told Daniel he would never return to Maison Vauclair. His friend tried to change his mind. He offered Ethan a few days off, followed by day shifts. He promised to speak with the owners and ask for a raise. But after everything he had seen, Ethan could not enter that house again. He knew what had happened in room 30. He knew whose crying the guests had heard, and whom the girl in white had been waiting for at the front doors. Daniel understood that he could not persuade him to stay. Before Ethan left, Daniel asked him not to tell the guests about the vision. No evidence of the murder remained. The owners would call it a hallucination caused by his head injury, and stories about a ghost could destroy the hotel's reputation. Ethan promised he would not create a public scandal. Then he submitted his resignation. He was released from the hospital a few days later. When Ethan arrived home, he left his bag by the door and took off his shoes. He had no energy to change clothes. He walked into the bedroom and lay down on top of the bedspread. The apartment was quiet. No old floorboards creaked. No one walked above the ceiling. There was no crying beyond the walls, and no sound of heavy male footsteps. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he felt safe. Maison Vauclair was far away. Room 30 was locked. Everything that had happened to Celeste belonged to the past again. Several minutes passed. A faint, sweet fragrance appeared in the room. At first, Ethan thought the scent had clung to his clothes from the hotel, but it grew stronger. Magnolia. He opened his eyes and slowly turned his head. A fresh white blossom lay on the pillow beside him. For more than a century and a half, Auguste's crime had remained a secret. But what he had done had not disappeared. Sometimes the truth returns after years. Sometimes it takes decades or even centuries. But a day comes when the past finds a way to speak, even if it must reach out to the living. What do you think? Can a crime be hidden forever? Or will the truth always find its way into the light, even after centuries? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like. It will help the channel grow and support the release of new supernatural stories. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one.